In 1945, it had become very clear to the Germans the war was lost. Most of Europe had been liberated. Their armies were on the run. Their homeland was being bombed day and night by relentless Russian, Commonwealth, and American airmen. They lacked men, ammunitions, and supplies, and were being chased by the Allies on every front. And yet, on the first day of the new year, these same allies were caught completely off guard. Learn how this all came about in this episode. Today, the 1st of January, marks the 80th anniversary of Operation Bodenplatte, or base plate in English. It was, in fact, the last large-scale Luftwaffe offensive of the war. It consisted of almost 1,100 German aircraft, an incredible amount when you think about how difficult the war had become for Germany. Many pilots were young and inexperienced, had practically no training hours, and had never seen combat. The veterans were exhausted and outnumbered. Even training units were sent up to the front to help fend off the advancing Russians and Allies. There was a lack of fuel, ammunitions, and most of all, aircraft and pilots. Yet the Luftwaffe managed to amass 1,050 fighters, which was about half of the entire operational force. Mostly Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts 109s of all variations were used. 11 Jagdgeschwaders were put into action, as were some night fighter units, ground attack squadrons, and reformed heavy fighter destroyer units. Enormous numbers indeed. As the Germans were losing momentum in the Battle of the Bulge, the plan was to regain the offensive by starting a new operation. On the ground, this would be Operation North Wind. In the air, it was Bodenplatte. In the morning of the 1st of January, 17 large Allied airfields would be attacked in this mass attack. These targets were located in the north of France, in the Netherlands, but most of all in Belgium. 11 Belgian targets, of which most had been German only a few months before, to be specific. The fields on the list were Eindhoven, Brussels, Antwerp, Ursel, Maldegem, and Ghent, to name a few. We will be visiting these airfields, or what remains of them, soon, so be sure to check it out later. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the operation began. This timing varied slightly from unit to unit due to organizational issues. Focke-Wulfs 190 and Messerschmitts 109s of all variations were used. The experienced veterans were placed in charge of a group of newer pilots, but some squadrons didn't have this luxury and flew into combat with no experienced personnel whatsoever. Many commanders were not allowed to brief their men until the very last moment, which confused many airmen. Some pilots did not know they were going to attack until they were halfway there. The operation had also not been properly briefed to the German ground forces. The anti-aircraft units, seeing these huge numbers of aircraft and thinking they were Allied, shot down several German aircraft. The Allied intelligence had failed to detect the German intention, so their air forces were caught completely off guard. They scrambled every base and managed to get some aircraft in the air, but were not able to stop the German onslaught. Many dogfights were being fought out over a very large air front, going from France over Belgium up into the Netherlands. Many sites had only recently moved their anti-aircraft weapons closer to the front, which meant the Luftwaffe didn't take as many damage as might previously have been the case. The official total number ranges between 450 and 600 Allied aircraft destroyed, most of them on the ground. The American records, however, remain incomplete up to this very day. The specific losses taken by the 8th Air Force on this day have not been noted down or have been lost to history. So the number should be a bit higher, unfortunately. The German Luftwaffe, on the other hand, lost between 300 and 350 aircraft. This might seem as a success, but in this phase of the war, where every man counted, the operation was considered a failure by the German High Command. What was even worse than the loss of these aircraft was the loss of the pilots themselves. About 250 pilots were killed or captured, many of which were veterans and skilled airmen. 3 air commodores, 5 group commanders, and 15 squadron leaders had been lost. Irreplaceable losses. The Luftwaffe had never been weaker and was unable to mount any major wartime offensive ever again. The hardest hit airfields were Eindhoven, Brussels, St. Trond, and Ghent. Dozens of planes lay burned out next to the runway. Many hangars had been bombed, and all the infrastructures had been strafed. The runways were unusable, and thousands of Allied personnel were killed and wounded. The most destroyed types of aircraft were P-51s, Spitfires, and Thunderbolts. It only took a couple of days to repair everything and a couple of weeks to replace the lost aircraft. With German aviation fuels being at a premium, not a lot of time was available for training. The Luftwaffe simply did not have the means to replace the lost men and machines and actually shortened the war for itself. What was supposed to be a final blow to regain momentum actually ended up being a self-destructing act. Who knows what the world would have looked like had the Battle of the Bulge been successful for the German forces. So every year on this date, don't just celebrate the new year, but maybe also keep these airmen in your thoughts. These airmen are not forgotten. As always, you can share your thoughts or stories in the comment below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'd be happy to see you in a next episode.